We are going to talk about open data quite a bit. I'd love to start the conversation just with your background, because what's interesting is that you're actually coming from the VC world and you know, other sort of like startup-y type experiences. So
I guess last time I coded was CS50 in college, or last time I was seriously coding. And so I was in the business world for about 10 years, and I was a venture capitalist for about 5 years after business school, and I was actually on my honeymoon, and I opened up the newspaper and it says Lehman Brothers goes bust. The challenge with that is I was working for Lehman Brothers Venture Capital at the time. I said, honey, we got a problem here. But I made a bit of a career pivot. I'd always been interested in public service, and so I ended up getting hired at the FCC. And then I've been at the White House for almost 4 years, and so I'm now U.S. Deputy Chief Technology Officer, and I lead the President's open data initiatives and also help coordinate the domestic open government agenda, as well as helping with personal data accessibility and portability in the administration.
Okay, terrific. Can you actually tell us a little bit about the CTO office in general? It was actually, I was asking around me just as a sanity check, and I think, you know, CTO of the U.S. versus CIO of the U.S. and who does what.
Sure. So the Chief Information Officer is based in the Office of Management and Budget. We're based in the Office of Science and Technology Policy. For those of you not familiar with the presidency or the White House, those are two kind of places in there. But fundamentally, the CIO kind of thinks about federal IT. We spend about $80 billion in federal IT. And so the CIO's office is thinking about policy related to that, and the budgets related to that. And the CTO's office is much more of an entrepreneur in residence, an innovation office. And so just as one example, we started the Presidential Innovation Fellows Program, which I help run now, which is how do we bring entrepreneurs, data scientists, product managers, designers, developers into government for a 12-month tour of duty paired with teams. So we also do traditional tech policy from telecom and internet and IP to other tech as well.
Okay, terrific. Just tell us about all the amazing things that you guys have been doing. So there's this interesting paradox in that there's been this just incredibly innovative policy that has been put to existence over the last few years, and people, including in the startup world, don't know that much about it. So could you just like do the sort of the 101 version from data.gov to the Data Act of 2014?
Yeah. So the first day in office, the president signed a memorandum around open government and transparency, and it led to the creation of data.gov. And it required federal agencies for the first time to register some of their data assets and make them available to the world. And that led to a series of open data initiatives across a number of vertical areas in health, energy, education, public safety, global development, where we actually started to think about building an ecosystem. That is not just how do we open up data and make it a little bit more liquid or useful, but also how do you engage entrepreneurs, innovators, scientists, journalists, users of the data, and actually try to increase those feedback loops. In 2013, the president signed an executive order making open and machine readable the new default for government information and requiring agencies to start managing data as an asset. So think about it. We inventory battleships, we inventory people, and we inventory desks and desk chairs, but we weren't really inventorying data, and we weren't thinking about data through the strategic life cycle, right? And so if you're talking about open data just at time of dissemination, you're probably doing a disservice, right? And you're probably only focused on a few or narrow set of information, maybe only in the statistical realm. But when you think about it, we collect and create a tremendous amount of data. When I say we, the federal government, right? So whether it's regulatory, whether it is R&D, we spend $140 billion a year in research and development. You think about all the kind of financial, all the transaction, the security. There's so much data that we collect and create, and it's your data. And if we can responsibly open it up and make it liquid, we should. And we have some great examples of this, right? So the two that I always like to talk about, One is global positioning system, right? This is a precision targeting system that was opened up for civilian access initially under Reagan and then further under Clinton, and it's led to this vast ecosystem from things in your phone to as super tankers, right? Navigate via GPS, but you can also get a chip for a dog collar, right? And there's apps at $5 a month that use GPS, and so that's a government information system that has been made open to the world. Another classic example is weather data, right? So your local news weathercaster, most of what they are using is government weather data, but so is weather.com. So is a whole host of financial instruments and derivatives based upon weather data. So these are kind of classic examples in ecosystems where you have multi-billion-dollar economies, you have large public companies, you have small startups, you have a whole set of users. And really what this administration has been working on is let's replicate this across all of the data that we've got. Let's actually open it up and make it liquid for innovators, entrepreneurs, for the business community as fuel for scientific discovery and economic growth. So there's just tremendous opportunities here, and it's hard to kind of talk about just a few, but if I could just talk about one, for example, on the health side, right? So health, you think about NIH, right? And you think about all of the National Institute of Health, right? You think about the genomics and microbiome and proteomics and all of this really interesting information that if we can responsibly unlock, there's just tremendous opportunities as we move to more personalized medicine. The president was talking about this last week. But you can also think about in terms of as we move from volume to value in the healthcare system, as the earlier speaker was saying, right? We absolutely need to have better coordinated care, and we need to have more effective and cheaper care. And it really, public data is going to be one of the inputs into the innovation that drives all of that.
And so the Data Act of 2014, that's for spending data specifically?
So the Data Act in 2014, which the president signed in May, is about open data meets fiscal spending, right? And so how can we improve the standardization of federal spending throughout the life cycle from when it starts as an idea and a bill and all the way through the commitment and the spending and so forth? And how can you standardize some terms? And how can we improve usaspending.gov? So one thing, I guess I'll just take a poll, is how many folks have looked at data.gov? Okay. So it's not a bad sampling. We're making progress, but we can still make additional progress. So we moved it to an open source project. So it's now CCAN and WordPress. It's on GitHub, so you can actually log an issue or put some feedback. We're pushing code, I think, every 4 weeks or so. So it's a good example of how we are not only trying to open up our data, but we're also trying to use more open design principles and open source software as well.
And when I looked at it today, there was 156,000 data sets on data.gov.
That's true, but you also have to be careful about counting. Right? Because one of the things we found early on is if you're just counting and you tell the bureaucracy that the numbers are important, and even if you don't explicitly say that, but implicitly, if you have folks in the senior officials that keep using higher and higher numbers, it encourages people to chop it up. And that's just ridiculous, right? I mean, that no developer would want data sets to be chopped up into smaller and smaller CSVs. So you have to be careful about making sure that we're not creating perverse incentives in quoting a number like that. What's more important, I think, is are entrepreneurs, innovators, large companies, scientists, journalists, are people able to find and use the data that they're looking for? And is it an input into the kinds of value that they are creating? Oftentimes in combination with their own proprietary data or other kinds of information about yourself or whatever.
You talked about building a data ecosystem around that data set. Can you? I mean, it's amazing to see the administration doing like data hackathons and data palooza and that type of thing. Can you talk about what you?
Yeah.
What you guys do?
So this is really a play that my previous boss I've worked for all three of the U.S. CTOs. But Todd Park, who's the second CTO, really pioneered this at Health and Human Services, and it's something that we have spread, encouraged the entire executive branch. In fact, I see places outside of federal government doing this as well. And really, the idea was, if you want to make your data better, rather than sitting around and talking about it, why don't we actually get a few users? And why don't we go out and ask some entrepreneurs, some developers, someone who would actually care about that data, and put them in a room and try and think about some useful things, maybe some apps that they might build, or some product extensions, or collaborations, or what have you. Get them excited about that, get them to kind of commit and go off and build some stuff, and then celebrate that innovation. And so that really was the beginning of a data jam, that kind of collaborative workshop, and a data palooza, which is just an event or a summit to celebrate. And in healthcare, we now have annual data paloozas that are several thousand people in multiple days, and really are celebrating a lot of the innovation in the healthcare ecosystem. But in energy, in public safety, in climate, in a whole host of other vertical education, we've been having these data jams and data paloozas. But we also have to go to where the conversation is, right? So we participate in Stack Exchange. There's an open data Stack Exchange. We participate on listservs, and by we, I mean people from across the federal government. And we go to hackathons, and while we throw some of our own, and I always encourage the agencies to throw them themselves, I think it's also really important that they go to meetups and hackathons themselves and be a part of the community in a very organic way. And these are all about how do you kind of increase the feedback loop to understand, what can we make more available as bulk data, or how can we create an API? What should we do more of? What should we do less of? There's a time and a place for formal requests for information and kind of very formal ways to get feedback. But one of the things that this administration really has pioneered is how do we increase these feedback loops with data jams, data paloozas, hackathons, all of these. We've even had White House hackathons, and you can imagine the conversations about using that term.
There seems to have been tremendous progress around building a developer ecosystem and getting the data in the hands of the us geeks. What about making sure that that data becomes a part of all those consumer websites? Like, for example, if I go to Yelp, why do I not have the latest sanitation department information? Is that a federal versus state versus local type issue?
Yeah, so I think you actually do see a ton of federal data as well as state and local data in a lot of the consumer properties. So I'll give you a couple examples. If you use a major search platform, Google or Bing or others, and I guess a major search platform, and you put in a drug name, you'll see in the knowledge box or knowledge panel or something like that, you'll see a bunch of information, and sourced will be the FDA, or HHS, or the Institute of Medicine. If you're looking for real estate in Zillow or Trulia or any of these real estate sites, there's actually a ton of not just local data, but federal data from a variety of statistical agencies, Federal Reserve, a whole bunch of places that actually power that. And so in the particular example in Yelp, I think they've done a great job of being a market maker from a standards perspective, of saying, hey, if we can encourage people to standardize on a health grade, then we can actually post that for restaurants.
So they're defining their standards that everybody else has to conform to? Or?
Well, I mean, so it's one of those things where you want an open standard, but you also want a standard of scale, right? Right. And so a standard that isn't used is just a standard on a piece of paper, or right. So, but you really do want the data to flow, and there are a lot of large consumer platforms that are using our data in so many different ways today. But it's not all about seeing data. I mean, another one of my favorite examples is Climate Corporation. So it started in 2006 by, I think it was a couple ex-Google engineers, David Freeberg and his partner. And today they focus on farmers, but then they were just thinking about the entire business community and how it's impacted by weather. I think they drove by a bicycle hut and saw that it was raining, and they're like, if you're going to rent bicycles, what do you do if it's raining? And so they built this whole company around weather insurance. And they provide weather and then later crop insurance to farmers, and a series of apps around managing your yields and managing your particular field so that you get paid out faster when the weather is bad in your particular field, and it's all customized around your particular farm. What's great about that is they're not actually providing data. They are providing financial instruments and software in an easy-to-use format to farmers. And so they're solving, there's, again, to the earlier speakers, we're talking about what's the customer orientation. The customer orientation is that farmers have had data for years, but if I can pay them out quickly with financial products, and it's that kind of value add on top of data that is so exciting. There will always be a need for us to provide certain information products. So you think about hazardous weather, right? The Commerce Department, the National Oceanographic Atmospheric Administration, will always have a need to broadcast about hurricanes and tornadoes. That will always be part of their core public safety mission. But on the other side of it, they still have 20 terabytes of data that they collect and create a day around weather, and they're only making 10% of that available. And so they want to know how can they open up that other 90% and make that available for the world to use.
Great. One last question from me before I open it up to everybody else. What are your frustrations in terms of what you would like to do and what takes a much longer time, and what are your thoughts?
I think we're just scratching the surface here, right? So Todd used to describe the Raiders of the Lost Ark, that final scene where people are putting the Ark in that huge warehouse. We really have massive amounts of data, and a lot of it can be made open to the world and should be made open to the world. It's your data, and we need to move with all due speed while continuing to protect privacy and security when it's personal. So I want us to move faster, and part of the way we do that is engage all of you in telling not just me, but all of the hard people, the thousands and tens of thousands of people that are working on this particular topic across the agencies, what you find interesting, what you don't, because getting those feedback cycles faster is what really makes and spurs a faster growing and more useful ecosystem here.
Okay, wonderful. Questions from people who haven't had a chance to ask a question? Just this gentleman here, and then we'll do Teddy afterwards.
I'm first.
Yes, name and company, please.
Yes, I'm Amir Kandani from Morgan Stanley. I have looked at data.gov several times. I'm familiar with certain financial data that's being made available via Dodd-Frank, like swap data, repositories, stuff like that. But it feels to me that SEC and other regulatory agencies have a lot more data that, if opened up in a Kaggle type of setup, can dramatically change the way we look at risk, the way we look at both on the trading side as well as risk management side. And I just wanted to know whether there are certain other data sets that you guys are thinking of making available, and if not, basically if you do it, it would be awesome.
Great. I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand the question. Are there additional data sets that
in
the
financial
SEC
world,
or the financial world?
In the financial world, it seems like when I look at data.gov, there was literally nothing in the financial world that would be remotely useful for somebody like me, and I'm very, very aggressive in looking for data sets that I can use to make money on. So,
Got it. So I think we can do a much better job in opening up financial data. And on the one hand, the SEC pioneered, right, with Edgar database. On the other hand, to your point, there's still a lot of that's available. It's really exciting to see that the Federal Reserve now has a chief data officer role. In fact, a number of agencies, Department of Commerce is hiring for a chief data officer, Department of Energy is hiring for a chief data officer, Department of Transportation just hired a chief data officer. So you see a number of cabinet level agencies that are hiring them. Maybe we'll get Treasury to hire one as well. What is interesting is IRS launched something called Get Transcript this year. Has anyone heard of this? So this is a good test. because the name probably could be improved. So get transcript. It turns out that you have the right to get your own tax information from the IRS. The IRS gets a lot of phone calls every year, and the phone calls are you still after me? Did you get my check? Or I need a piece of information at the end of the day, right? And on that piece of information, the more that we can move to serving that up digitally and electronically makes all the sense in the world. So it used to be that you or your tax preparer would write the IRS something, maybe because you lost all your information, and they would send something back via paper. You actually have a right to get your own information outside of some adjudication, law enforcement, national security context. You have a right to your own personal protected data that the government is holding. It's just that right is usually exercised on paper, and where we're trying to move a lot of the My Data initiatives about getting your own personal health records, for example, the blue button in the VA context or green button for energy data. The IRS launched this thing in 2014 with really no marketing called Get Transcript. And they went from 3 million kind of paper requests served a year. Now there are over 12 million requests served a year, and it's basically providing an individual taxpayer their own tax information up to the last 3 years of their tax records, and it's called a transcript for technical reasons. But and that's really important when you think about lending applications and credit applications and so forth. And so you think about, can we move that to an API? Can I not only be able to access and download my tax information or my health information, but can I have data portability and really transmit it to the people that I trust or services that I trust? And so that's a really exciting thing in the financial world. But I will take your feedback about how do we go surface more financial data sets, because we certainly can do more.
All right, time for one last question.
Hi, Ted Angelis from Blue Water Labs, a little data science consulting firm. I've been doing some work lately with IBM Watson, and I'm really excited about what's happening in healthcare with AI and cognitive computing, I guess. So my question to you is, I understand like some of the big health let's say in cancer, like Sloan Kettering's doing a lot of exciting stuff with cognitive computing that I believe is saving lives right now. And they're accessing data from different cancer research databases, from my understanding, right? But what role does the president's open data initiative or your area play in that? Do you know what I'm asking?
Yes.
Okay.
And so I guess the best way to think about this is if data is completely public and should be made public, then it's actually an easier set of conversations, right? It's how do we make it digital, because sometimes it's on paper? How do we make it more liquid, either in bulk? How do we have an API? And then there's a question of prioritization, because there's a lot of those efforts. And so it's like, where is the most social impact, the most value for the economy, all those kinds of things. In areas where you have personal information or people can be re-identified, it's a much more interesting question, because you absolutely need to protect privacy, but we've also seen the harms that are possible, or the lack of advances that are possible, I should say, if we aren't being able to data mine in appropriate ways. And so that's really kind of at the tension of a lot of the data as a public good to advance healthcare, to advance scientific discovery. And so one of the practical ways that we're asking agencies to deal with this is to really think about data in three classes. There's stuff that is public, there's stuff that is restricted public, and there's stuff that is non-public. And in that restricted public category, that oftentimes is the really interesting stuff, because you're putting legal agreements around it, you're putting things in data enclaves, either physical or virtual. There's all kinds of kind of protocols around it, but there's also a tremendous amount of value societal good in the health, in the education, in a whole bunch of other spaces. And I think those are some of the questions that we're going to continue to wrestle with, and I hope that we can continue to make sure that we make that data responsibly available to as many qualified parties as possible, because a lot of the advances in science and healthcare, for example, are dependent on them, or will go faster if that's possible.
And the tie-in is, does the president know how to code?
The president has an iPad.
On that note, wonderful. That's all the time we have. Thank you very much.